आपका स्टडी विद सुधीर डिजिटल क्लासरूम में स्वागत है। आज हम देखेंगे इतिहास में और इतिहास के एक बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण पन्ने पर जो कि है राइज ऑफ डिक्टेटरशिप। ये आईसीएसई क्लास 10 सिलेबस का एक अंग भी है और ये आता है फर्स्ट वर्ल्ड वॉर के बाद। दिस कम्स इमीडिएटली आफ्टर द फर्स्ट वर्ल्ड वॉर बिकॉज द 2 डिकेड्स बिटवीन 1919 एंड 1939 जबकि दूसरा विश्व युद्ध शुरू हुआ, इन दो दशकों में क्या हुआ उस पर नज़र डालेंगे। जो पहला दशक था 1919 से लेके 1929 तक, 1929 तक, तब एक तरह से काफ़ी जगहों पर डेमोक्रेसीज फ्लरिश हुई, एक तरह से शांति थी। ख़ास तौर से यूरोप पे काफ़ी सारे नए देश बने थे, जैसे यूगोस्लाविया, ऑस्ट्रिया हंगरी में मोनार्की ख़त्म हो गया था। रूस में भी ज़ार को ओवरथ्रो करके रशियन रेवोल्यूशन 1917 में ही हो गया था। तो एक तरह से काफ़ी सारे देशों में जिस तरह की प्रक्रिया थी, जिस तरह का ऑर्डर था, पॉलिटिकल ऑर्डर, उसमें काफ़ी बदलाव देखने को मिला था। लेकिन 1929 से लेके 1939 तक, 1929 to 1939 is one major changes took place in many countries across the world, and one of the most important aspects of that was the rise of dictatorships. And the two countries जहाँ पर हम नज़र डालेंगे वे है इटली, जहाँ पे बेनिटो मुसोलिनी रहे, और दूसरा जर्मनी, जहाँ पे एडोल्फ हिटलर आए। एडोल्फ हिटलर को हम भाग 2 में देखेंगे। भाग ए में पार्ट ए ऑफ दिस चैप्टर वील बी लुकिंग एट व्हाट हैपेंड टू बेनिटो मुसोलिनी एंड व्हाट हैपेंड एंड व्हाट इज फैसिज्म ऑल अबाउट। आज भी आपको फैसिज्म एक टर्म काफ़ी सुनाई पड़ता है। जब भी किसी को एक तरह से ऑटोक्रेटिक घोषित करना हो, उसको बोला जाता है कि यू आर डिस्प्लेइंग fascist tendency. So this term came from essentially what Benito Mussolini did in Italy in the 1929 to 1939 decade before the start of the Second World War. So this is what we are going to be looking at. So ये दो बड़े बाहुबली डिक्टेटर्स, बाहुबली नेता उभर कर आए, जर्मनी में एडोल्फ हिटलर और इटली में बेनिटो मुसोलिनी। So उससे पहले हम ये देखेंगे कि जो मोटो जो बना था स्पेशली 1929 टू 1939 में, जो टोटलिटेरियन डिक्टेटरशिप्स जिसकी मैंने बात कही, वो जो इमर्ज हुए, उसका मेन मोटो, मेन आइडियल यही था कि वे चाहते थे एवरीथिंग फॉर द स्टेट, दैट द स्टेट इज़ द मोस्ट इम्पॉर्टेंट एंड द इंडिविजुअल डज नॉट मैटर। एवरीथिंग फॉर द स्टेट, everything within the state and nothing outside the state. I repeat, because this is something which you should know, that this is the entire motto on which these kind of totalitarian dictatorships were founded. Everything for the state, everything within the state and nothing outside the state. That is, the state is the most important और individual की कोई there is no importance for the individual. Now let's look at the word fascism as to what is essentially meant by the word fascism. The basic definition of fascism, and this is something which you should know by heart because this is a definition which you should use in the examination paper also. It could come as a 2-mark paper or as part of a larger answer. Now fascism was an intensely nationalistic. We have spoken about aggressive nationalism, which was one of the causes which led to the First World War. Now here also fascism was an intensely nationalistic, anti-communist and anti-democratic movement. It was against democracy, it was against communism, and it was intensely nationalistic, and that served as a model to dictatorial regimes in both Italy as well as in Germany, which we will be talking about in part 2 of this chapter, Rise of Dictatorship, right? So the word fascism itself has been derived from the Italian word fascio, F-A-S-C-I-O. That is the origin of the word from which the English word fascism has come, and basically fasces itself refers to a bundle of sticks which are bound together, and they kind of symbolize civic unity and the authority of the Romans to punish the wrongdoers. So it's essentially, once again, as I said, the authority of the state is what is reinforced in the definition of fascist, and even in this, as I said, it's intensely nationalistic, anti-democratic and anti-communist, and that served as a model to dictatorial regimes in both Italy and Germany. Now let's look at the causes which led to the rise of fascism, because this is very important, and the most important factor is the Treaty of Versailles, about which we spoke in part 2 of the chapter on World War I, because the Treaty of Versailles, which most people thought will ensure that Germany is not able to fight another war in the future, it actually was so flawed and it was so anti-Germany because all these people tried to geographically, politically and militarily control, एक तरह से जर्मनी को सीमित करने की कोशिश जो की गई, उससे हुआ ये कि जर्मनी में एक तरह से काफ़ी रोष जगा, काफ़ी क्रोध हुआ. देयर वाज अ लॉट ऑफ एंगर अगेंस्ट व्हाट दे थॉट वर वेरी अनजस्ट टर्म्स ऑफ द ट्रीटी ऑफ वर्साइल्स. बट हाउ डिड इट लीड टू फैसिज्म इन इटली? नाउ देयर वाज डिस्कंटेंट आफ्टर द Treaty of Versailles because Italy had joined the Allies. It was initially with the Central Forces, that is with Germany, but it joined the UK, France, Russia bloc in the First World War to gain territories of Turkey and Germany. It wanted to gain control of territories from Germany and Turkey. But by the Treaty of Versailles, it could get only Southern Tyrol and Trentino and the coastal regions of Dalmatia. It could get only the three regions of Southern Tyrol, Trentino and the coastal regions of Dalmatia. She could get no part, Italy could get no part of both Turkey and Germany. So there was discontent with what the Treaty of Versailles had done as far as Italy was concerned. Number two was the economic crisis which was developing in Italy. Italy had suffered huge losses like many other countries had done, but Italy definitely उसने काफ़ी भारी नुकसान उसको सहना पड़ा. काफ़ी सारी प्रॉपर्टी नष्ट हुई फर्स्ट वर्ल्ड वॉर में, और जो पूरा जो ट्रेड था, कॉमर्स था, पूरी तरह से नष्ट हो गया. काफ़ी तरह से डिसरप्शन हुआ जिसकी वजह से इकोनॉमिक क्राइसिस, फाइनेंशियल क्राइसिस वाज देयर इन दी कंट्री. तीसरा पार्ट है political instability. Now as far as political instability was concerned, now democracy though, as I said, in many countries was introduced after the end of the Second World War. Italy was one of them. In 1919 democracy was introduced in Italy, but what happened was the elections did not give a very clear majority to any one party, as a result of which there was a lot of uthal-puthal as far as the democratic process and setup was concerned. So between 1919 and 1922, in a period of 3 years, there were as many as 6 coalition governments. Now what is a coalition government? Coalition government, as we have seen in India, is when जब कई सारी पार्टियां मिलकर एक तरह से सरकार बनाने की कोशिश करती हैं, लेकिन मोस्टली these kind of governments are not stable. वो स्टेबल नहीं रहती और जल्दी से गिर जाती हैं. इसी वजह से 1919 और 1922 के बीच में 6 ऐसी कोलिशन सरकारें इटली में बनी, और उसकी वजह से काफ़ी सारी पॉलिटिकल इंस्टेबिलिटी का सामना इटली को करना पड़ा इन 3 सालों के बीच में. और इसकी वजह से अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट जगी, सरकारी नीतियां ठीक से नहीं बन पाए, राइट्स हुए. तो एक तरह से इटली में शांतिपूर्ण एक तरह से माहौल बिल्कुल नहीं बन पाया. Then there was, of course, it also, now what it led to, the political instability led to class conflicts between the rich and the poor, about this, given the fact that the economy also was not doing very well. The real issue in most parts of continental Europe was whether the control of the government and the economic systems would continue to be in the possession of aristocrats, that is the rich people, the upper class, or whether the labor class would try to gain control of what it said was its right, the less privileged majorities. Now the other big reason for the rise of fascism was the failure of the League of Nations. It was a complete flop show. It was formed in 1920 after the First World War, but it really failed in its duty to maintain world peace and prevent this kind of small wars. It did not kind of act with force, and if it had done so, because even the League of Nations, जिस तरह से League of Nations की को घटित किया गया, उसी में काफ़ी सारे फ्लॉज थे. बिकॉज अमेरिका को पहले शामिल नहीं किया गया, रशिया को पहले शामिल नहीं किया गया, जर्मनी को तो बिल्कुल बाहर रखा गया. तो एक तरह से इट वॉज अ वेरी क्लोज्ड क्लब ऑफ यूके, फ्रांस एंड यूएसए विच डिसाइडेड टू फॉर्म द लीग ऑफ नेशंस, और उसमें यूएसए भी शामिल नहीं हुआ. तो एक तरह से इट वॉज अ फ्लॉड वर्ल्ड बॉडी स्ट्रक्चर दैट वॉज फॉर्म्ड, और it was like doomed right from the beginning. And इसी की वजह से मुसोलिनी और बाद में हिटलर भी एक तरह से उभर कर आए इटली और जर्मनी के अंदर. And the last reason for the rise of fascism was the leadership provided by Benito Mussolini. Now he was a very charismatic kind of a leader. He had a natural flair for leadership. He was called the Deuce, which means the leader, and he was a very good speaker, a very good orator, and he could actually hold his own, and he managed to rouse the people of Italy in order to think that they need to be an intensely nationalistic citizenry, and take pride in the rise and the progress of Italy. So Benito Mussolini really came up as a leader in order to ensure that these kind of problems can be dealt with. Okay, so now let's look at what were the aims of fascism. What did it want to achieve in the country of Italy? What did Benito Mussolini really want to achieve? So fascism का main point ये था that it was completely anti-democracy. It was the antithesis of democracy because it believed that the democracy, the democratic setup only increased the gulf between the rich and the poor and it was not suitable for Italy. दूसरी बात, फैसिस्ट एक पार्टी और एक लीडर को सपोर्ट करते थे एंड दैट्स व्हाट मुसोलिनी रियली बिलीव्ड इन. तीसरी बात थी कि फैसिस्ट चाहते थे कि सारे सेक्शंस ऑफ सोसाइटी पे पूरी तरह से इक्वल कंट्रोल हो और बड़ी बात ये थी कि वे नेशनलिज्म पर काफ़ी जोर डालते थे. दे यूज्ड टू एम्फसाइज एंड स्ट्रेस ऑन नेशनलिज्म एंड नॉट ऑन एनी काइंड ऑफ इंडिविजुअल इंस्टीट्यूशंस. दे ऑल्सो बिलीव दैट द इंटरेस्ट ऑफ द स्टेट, एज आई सेड अर्लियर, द इंटरेस्ट ऑफ द स्टेट शुड गेन प्रेसिडेंस ओवर द इंटरेस्ट ऑफ एनी इंडिविजुअल इन द कंट्री. Then they also believed in an aggressive foreign policy और इसी की वजह से काफ़ी सारे जो उनके जो relations थे बाकी देशों के साथ वे काफ़ी बिगड़े. तो this aggressive foreign policy was a major reason and it was like a part and parcel of the aggressive nationalism which was seen within the country, and they regarded war, and this is an important thing, they favored an aggressive foreign policy and they regarded war as an instrument for furthering national interest, as an instrument for furthering national interest. So this is an important point, aggressive nationalism at home and aggressive foreign policy as an instrument for furthering national interest. In fact, Mussolini ka ek quote hai in which he would say that Italy must expand or perish. Must expand or perish. So it is a very aggressive kind of an approach that Benito Mussolini essentially had as far as furthering his country's interests were concerned. So you need to remember what were the aims of fascism and how did Mussolini go about achieving them. Now what happened to Italy? So Italy, हालांकि उस समय पर Victor Emmanuel was still the king of Italy. Benito Mussolini, Victor Emmanuel was still the king of Italy. Benito Mussolini started governing the country. He was really the the most powerful man as far as Italy was concerned. Now what was the impact of all these things that we have seen, the causes for the rise of fascism and the aims of fascism on what was happening within Italy during this decade before the start of the Second World War? And this is extremely important because हालांकि इटली को बाद में सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वॉर में defeat, I mean it was defeated in the Second World War, and Mussolini himself, his career was kind of, it ended in disgrace. He was deposed by his own party council and he was executed in April 1945 at the end of the Second World War. But that is something which we will deal in the chapter on the Second World War. But at this point in time, let's look at what Mussolini managed to achieve in Italy under his leadership and kind of propagating fascist tendencies, fascist philosophy. मेन पॉइंट ये था कि मुसोलिनी ने चाहा कि क्योंकि हमने देखा कि देयर वाज अ ह्यूज इकोनॉमिक क्राइसिस इन इटली, उन्होंने ये कोशिश की कि इसको एक इकोनॉमिक पावर हाउस बनाने की कोशिश की जाए. तो वन ऑफ द मेजर इनिशिएटिव्स अंडरटेकन बाय बेनिटो मुसोलिनी वाज कि उन्होंने कोशिश की कि अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट को कम किया जाए, बिकॉज देयर आर लॉट ऑफ अनएम्प्लॉयड यूथ, देयर वाज अ लॉट ऑफ डिसकंटेंट विद इन द कंट्री, और उनकी पहली कोशिश ये थी कि अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट को रिड्यूस किया जाए, जॉब्स क्रिएट किया जाए. और जॉब्स कैसे क्रिएट किया जाए, उसके लिए उन्होंने एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव और इकोनॉमिक रिफॉर्म्स को शुरू किए, काफ़ी सारे पावर प्लांट्स को एस्टैब्लिश किया ताकि कोल की शॉर्टेज को कम किया जाए, और काफ़ी सारे लैंड को कल्टीवेशन के अंदर लाए ताकि एग्रीकल्चर को एक तरह से बढ़ावा मिले इटली के अंदर और काफ़ी सारे एम्प्लॉयमेंट भी जनरेट हो सके. इसके साथ साथ काफ़ी सारी फैक्ट्रीज़ को फिर से रिवाइव किया गया ताकि अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट को कम किया जा सके. पब्लिक वर्क्स कार्यक्रम शुरू किया जिसके तहत काफ़ी सारे ब्रिजेस, रोड्स, बिल्डिंग्स का निर्माण शुरू हुआ ताकि अगेन एक तरह से जब कंस्ट्रक्शन सेक्टर जब एक तरह से वाइब्रेंट होता है तो अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट रेट भी थोड़ी सी कम हो जाती है, क्योंकि काफ़ी सारे लोगों को मास स्केल पे नौकरियां मिल जाती है, काम मिल जाता है. दूसरी चीज़ ये भी की, और दिस इज़ वन ऑफ द पॉजिटिव्स ऑफ व्हाट मुसोलिनी डिड, ही ट्राई टू एराडिकेट इलिटरेसी बाय फोकसिंग ऑन लाइब्रेरीज, बाय फोकसिंग ऑन स्कूल्स, बाय फोकसिंग ऑन कॉलेजेस. But along with this, since I already spoke about an aggressive foreign policy which also looked at war as an instrument for furthering national interest, he also increased the military might of Italy, because he obviously understood that this kind of an aggressive approach by Italy will eventually at some point or the other lead to war. So they also needed to be well staffed as far as their military might was concerned. तो उसकी कोशिश के तहत उन्होंने अपने military training को compulsory किया. इटली के अंदर मिलिट्री ट्रेनिंग वॉज मेड कंपल्सरी, एंड also the Italy's naval powers was sought to be increased by under Mussolini's leadership. So basically, again coming back to an aggressive foreign policy, increasing the military might, trying to reduce unemployment, trying to reduce illiteracy, but some of the positives as far as Benito Mussolini tried to do. But the larger impact of fascism as an intensely nationalistic, anti-democratic and anti-communist philosophy meant कि एक तरह से काफ़ी सारे एक तरह से disputes जग गए और it brought him into confrontation with many other countries, which eventually culminated in the Second World War. And as I said, in 1945 things changed so dramatically within Italy itself that he was deposed by his own party council and he was executed in April 1945. So ये तो रहा जहाँ तक कि जो पहले बड़े बाहुबली नेता थे जो कि बेनिटो मुसोलिनी थे उनकी बात चली. बेनिटो मुसोलिनी is one of the tallest leaders of the 20th century, not very famous, known for infamous, और आज भी जब भी fascism की बात होती है तो एक तरह से negative shades में होती है. But nevertheless, you need to know about Mussolini to know the kind of changes, dramatic changes that took place between the First World War and the Second World War in the decade, especially before the start of the Second World War. In part 2 of Rise of Dictatorships, in this part 2 video, we will be looking at the rise and the impact of Adolf Hitler, who was probably an even more influential figure than Benito Mussolini from Germany, and the kind of impact he created on Germany and on the Second World War and on the world in general because of his way of leadership. Thank you very much for watching. Do subscribe to the channel and do ensure that you are able to watch both part 1 and part 2 of this chapter, Rise of Dictatorship, in your History ICSE Class 10 syllabus. Thank you.